Welcome to 15 Minutes of Pharma. My name is Pereira, Cruz, and my partner in this conversation is Manuel Fernandes. Manuel, in the last episode, we discussed pricing power. And one of the key ideas was that in pharmaceutical manufacturing, price is often not the variable that matters most. You mentioned risk matters, scarcity matters, time matters. So let me take that one step further. So if the system is starting to value those things differently, are we also reaching the end of, let's say, cheap pharmaceutical manufacturing?
Yeah, the short answer, Carlos, is yes. I think we are. But I would define that carefully. The end of cheap does not mean that cost stops mattering. It means that the old idea of cheap is no longer enough. For many years, a large part of pharma manufacturing could still be organized around nominal cost, lower labor cost, lower sourcing costs, lower price per kilo, lower capital burden through outsourcing. And well, that logic shaped the system for a long time. But the system today is more fragile, more regulated, more technologically complex, and well, more politically exposed. And once that happens, cheap stops being a sufficient way to think.
Okay, so this is not simply about prices going up. Okay, it's about the economics of the system changing.
Exactly, Carlos. The industry is still growing. Outsourcing is still growing. So this is not a story about contraction. It's a story about a system that has become much harder to run because the challenge is no longer just to find capacity. It is to find capacity that is reliable, that can absorb complexity, that can transfer technology well, that can scale predictably, and that can respond under pressure. So the shift in simple terms is this. We are somehow moving from a world optimized for nominal cost to a world optimized for reliable performance under complexity.
So, Manuel, you said we are moving from. So, what is driving this shift? That shift?
Yeah, Carlos, I would say that the first force is therapeutic complexity. A growing share of value is moving into biologics, peptides, mRNA, cell and gene therapies, ADCs, and well, other more complex modalities. And well, when therapies become more complex, the process becomes more important. And at that point, industrial execution stops being a commodity. You are no longer buying only output. You are buying process understanding, you are buying tech transfer capability, analytical robustness. You are buying quality systems, and you are buying reproducibility. So, one reason cheap is under pressure is very simple. The industry is increasingly manufacturing things that cannot be treated cheaply without increasing risk.
So, what you're saying is that complexity shifts value from just the molecule, to the process, to the whole process.
Exactly, Carlos. And well, once that happens, the role of the CDMO changes as well. The CDMO is no longer just a vendor. It increasingly becomes an extension of the client's industrial model. And well, that changes the question the customer is asking. The question is no longer only how cheaply can you make this? It becomes how safely can you transfer it? How predictably can you scale it? How fast can you respond? And well, how much risk do you remove from my system?
Yeah. And complexity, I think it's only part of the story. There's something more.
Yes, absolutely, Carlos. I would say that the second force is fragility. Well, for a long time, the system assumed that supply chains would remain open, that sourcing would be optimized globally. And well, that the cheapest qualified option was often the rational one. Well, that assumption is much weaker now. The signals we have been processing all point in the same direction. More concern with the resilience, more concern with raw material exposure, more concern with regulatory and geopolitical admissibility, and well, much less tolerance for failure. So what used to look efficient on paper may now look fragile in practice. And well, once you start pricing fragility properly, ship starts to look incomplete.
So part of what we call rising costs is really the system paying for resilience because of that fragility.
Yes, Carlos, exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, if you want redundancy, that costs money. If you want a more diversified supplier base, that will cost money as well. If you want capacity that is not only available but also admissible, that costs money. Well, if you want faster onboarding and smoother execution, that costs money too. So, ship is under pressure not only because inputs cost more. I would say that it is under pressure because the cost of being wrong has gone up.
Yeah, that's a very strong line. So the cost of being wrong has gone up. Okay, and I think that regulation must reinforce that even further.
Very much so, Carlos. Because the system is becoming more demanding, not only commercially but also regulatory. And here I think that there is a very important distinction. The future does not belong to companies that treat compliance as a box ticking exercise. I would argue that it belongs to companies that can industrialize compliance. And well, there is a difference between rigorous compliance and defensive compliance. Rigorous compliance creates robustness. Defensive compliance creates friction, regulatory friction. And well, when the whole system is under pressure, friction becomes expensive. So again, the answer is not less rigor. The answer is better execution inside a high rigor environment.
Okay, so cheap can often mean that the cost has simply been moved somewhere else. Yeah.
Exactly, Carlos. Yeah. Very well said. If a partner is cheaper only because tech transfer is weaker, because documentation is slower, because investigations take longer, or the interface between operations and quality is poor, then, well, the system will pay later. Maybe not in the quote, but in delays, in deviations, in planning instability, in slower scale up, and well, in more management overhead. Ship often survives by pushing costs into places that are harder to see.
Okay, that connects directly with another theme we have been discussing, digital. Okay, so because many people still treat digital as something optional.
Yes, Carlos, and well, I think that view is already outdated. Digital is no longer a side topic. It is part of the industrial economics of the system. And this is because digital is not mainly about IT. It's about visibility. It's about speed, about better decisions, faster tech transfers, about stronger planning. Well, it's about better throughput. In other words, digital is one of the few ways a system can absorb more complexity without collapsing into bureaucracy and delay. And well, one of the striking signals in the sector is that advanced analytics are still underused, even though the gains are already visible when companies apply them seriously. So, digital is not mainly about modernization. I would say that it is all about preserving performance under pressure.
Mm-hmm. So, which means that some capabilities that look like extra cost are actually mechanisms of control.
Absolutely, Carlos,
Mm.
or even more than control. They can become sources of advantage because if you can operate with better data, faster decisions, and more predictable execution, you are not just controlling cost, you are really improving the value of your capacity.
Yeah, yeah, great. Yes. And then there is talent. So, because, yeah, more complex systems also need better people.
Absolutely. That is another reason why the end of ship is structural. Well, you cannot run increasingly sophisticated manufacturing systems with commodity talent assumptions. You need strong operators, you need strong engineers, you need better project managers, better tech transfer teams, and well, you need to better cross-functional coordinate all these. So once that becomes true, labor is no longer just a cost input. It becomes really part of the capability architecture.
Okay, so talent and finally sustainability, because that is another area where the conversation is often subjective,
Yeah.
vague. Yeah. Mm.
Yes, absolutely, Carlos. But I think that direction is now much clearer. Sustainability is moving from the margin to the core of industrial performance. Um, Not as a branding exercise, not as a slide that topic,
Yeah.
but as an operating discipline. When you reduce solvent use, when you improve energy efficiency, when you cut waste, when you stabilize processes, when you somehow extend equipment life or reduce downtime, you are doing sustainability. Uh, but you are also doing better engineering, and well, better engineering usually improves economics. So sustainability is no longer only about ESG. It is increasingly about how well you run the system.
Okay, great. So if we bring all this together, so what is the central message of this episode?
Yeah, Carlos, that's a great question, and I would put it like this. The end of ship is not the end of cost discipline. I think this is very very important. Uh, it is the end of naive cost thinking. It is the end of the idea that cost can be understood in isolation from complexity, from fragility, from admissibility, compliance, talent, digital maturity, and last but not least, time. In the old regime, ship often looked rational because the system was not pricing enough of its own hidden weaknesses. In this new regime, many of those weaknesses are becoming visible. So, again, the question changes. The real question is no longer who gives me the lowest nominal cost, it becomes who gives me the most reliable industrial outcome in a much more demanding system.
Okay, and that has major implications for the competitive landscape.
Very much so, Carlos.
Mm.
Because not all CDMOs will benefit equally from this shift. Those still positioned mainly around low cost execution will remain under pressure. But, well, those that can combine, process excellence, regulatory maturity, digital integration, strong tech transfer, and well, long-term customer trust will become much more valuable. And this is also why Europe may matter more than many people once assumed. Not because Europe becomes cheap, but because in a more fragile and more demanding system, reliability itself becomes strategic.
So, in the end, this episode is not really about higher costs. It's about a different hierarchy of value inside the system.
Yeah, exactly, Carlos. I could not agree more. And once you see that clearly, the next question becomes unavoidable. Well, if the ship model is losing its grip, if resilience, admissibility, and execution are becoming more important, then who is actually going to control pharmaceutical manufacturing in the next phase?
No. Okay. Great bridge for the next episode. Yeah. So, Manuel, thank you. And thank you to all of you for listening to 15 Minutes of Pharma. So in this episode, we explored why the era of ship in pharmaceutical manufacturing is coming under pressure, and why rising costs may reflect not just inflation, but a deeper reordering of value across the industrial system. So see you all in the next episode, episode 9, Who Will Control Pharma Manufacturing?